Good afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Shabbar. I'm very well. I'm particularly happy today, Wednesday, 20th of May, because as a lifelong Arsenal football supporter and born and bred in North London, we won the Premier League yesterday for the first time in 22 years. And I feel surprisingly delighted and happy and relieved.
The smile on your face,
Yeah.
you couldn't wipe it off even if you tried.
No. Well, why would I try?
Yeah.
And I watched it with my two children, one nearly 17 and one sort of 13 and a half, and neither of them had ever seen Arsenal win the league. And it was very lovely, very good.
Fantastic. We could spend the episode talking about the joys of footballing triumphs, but we have a interesting topic to dive into, a new topic, which may branch out into a series. And this came off the back of some conversations that we've had over, I would say, the past 6 to 12 months, where this theme has cropped up in our discussions. And I started doing a little bit of reading around it. And I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole, which is centered around a book by a chap called Jason Hickel. And it's called Degrowth, Less is More. And I've found this concept quite fascinating. And we've decided that we're going to start looking at this in a bit more detail. I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, I can hear your interest and curiosity already. So just quickly, I don't know exactly where this conversation will go. So let me say to listeners where I think we are. I don't know the exact book, although I know the area. But the idea of less is more, or degrowth, or at least other ideas about money, society, economies, other than grow, and the more the economy grows, whatever that means, the better things are. So it sounds like you've read a book that's had a big impact on you, that's part of quite a wide range of thinkers, although they're still considered radical or unusual, who are questioning the economic orthodoxy of more is better, growing more, being more productive is better. And my understanding, Shabbar, is, that's just kind of, as you say, gone down the rabbit hole. It's raised questions for you, maybe about life, society, about your own work, your own life. And so what we want to do is have a series of conversations around this, and start today with probably what will be quite a free-flowing conversation, where mainly you share your story about, and I can maybe help you do that, about how you've discovered this and what it's made you think and questions it's raised. And then in the next 2 or 3 episodes, we'll kind of go into more detail. And just one thing worth saying in terms of context is, we haven't really talked about this on the podcast before, but I've had a long history myself personally in environmental kind of change, activism, climate work, and trying to get businesses and organizations to think more about these things. And over the years, I've taught various courses. So although it's not front of my mind, I guess I've hung out with a lot of cool people who have been asking these questions. And maybe I can offer a bit of context or some ideas about how these wider things about what's going on in society connect with the money work. And maybe you're a kind of maybe a newer stage with it, but then it's having a big impact on you. So we wanted to just have these conversations, because I think many people listening will also be, as well as interested in their own money, they're also going to be thinking about the state of the world and are our economic models correct, and maybe even, why am I saving in a pension if I don't believe in the system, or if the system's delivering the wrong stuff? So we're in that space, and it's big and messy and full of rabbit holes and emotions. And over to you. We don't know where to start. We haven't planned, but maybe say something about the impact this book has had on you.
Yeah. And just before we see, you said the rabbit hole, and I think I might have mentioned it at the beginning. It almost feels like I'm at that sort of pivotal moment from the Matrix film, where Morpheus has got the red pill and the blue pill. Yeah. And I don't know where this conversation is heading, and what this topic brings to the table, because it's so foreign to me in terms of a set of narratives or theories or whatever you want to call it. But fundamentally there is this new approach or new way of thinking, which is contrary to everything that pretty much I have done throughout my life professionally in terms of, the economic system, the way we arrange our money, the way we save and invest and plan for the future is kind of all based on this status quo that is almost untouchable, and it's the done thing. And this feels quite scary and exciting at the
Mm,
same time
mm,
to actually look at life and the way we engage in the world in a different way.
mm.
And so, yeah, so that's why I think it's like a red pill, blue pill
Great.
kind of moment, which is, yeah, do I just close my eyes and just pretend, yeah, that, stay the same, stay comfortable, or
I
take the,
didn't see that. I didn't
yeah,
read that book. I haven't got these
yeah.
questions.
So I think for me, it started, I came across this first book, which was The Moneyless Man, which I can't remember the chap's name, but it was
Mark
in
Boyle, I think it
Mark,
is.
yeah. And I just thought, oh, this is really interesting because it was very much in line with, the the conversations that we have around money and life and the way we arrange, our money.
Why did you read it? Or what did
I
you
just thought it
hear
was,
about?
I just saw it. Um, I think it was on YouTube. I saw an interview with the chap and he just started speaking about his year without money. And I was just like, well, I'm interested in money through the work that we do. This sounds fascinating. What a strange experiment to do.
To
And
live. So just to slow it down for people who don't know. So this is a guy called Mark Boyle who, as an experiment, just had no money or lived with no money for 1 year.
yeah, literally, he closed down his bank accounts, gave
Right.
up
Wow.
access to all money, and decided that he was going to see whether he could function in the world with no money.
Okay.
And so, yeah, a great book, social experiment. And the thing that came out of the book was the reason why, one of the motivating factors for him was this consciousness that the pursuit of more consumption, etc., was very damaging to the environment. And so I've never been that conscious about the impact that I have on the environment. I've
Mm,
not do some recycling at home and
mm,
try and make sure that I put things in the right colored bins. But, aside from that, I wouldn't
mm.
say that I'm totally passionate. I've always read things about climate change and net zero and the rate of global warming and all of that sort of stuff. Never really interested me, if I'm
And
being
maybe never really connected it to your money and
never
your
connected it.
pensions or earning or.
Seeing this person make such drastic moves because he was so concerned about the impact that he was having on the planet and the role that money was playing in that made me suddenly think, okay, there's something going on here. And so I read that book and then started looking at consumption.
Okay, let me
Uh,
slow
yeah.
you down a bit because this is all very interesting and I can feel your energy. I just want to take listeners on the journey and notice
Yeah.
different questions. So before we get to consumption, maybe that was you made
Mm.
an instant link. So you read his book. Out of his story, why the link to consumption? Were there other things that interested you, or was it straight towards this idea of blimey, we consume a lot with our money?
Well, it seemed that the consumption patterns that we have in the industrialized world, especially, have a very direct impact on the environment and the big issue, which is sort of global warming and the amount of carbon in the atmosphere in terms of, being one of the major driving forces for like the ecological change that we're sort of witnessing on so many levels.
Mm,
The flooding in Bangladesh, for example, or the polluting of the rivers, the melting of the ice caps, the changes in weather patterns, the
mhm,
destruction of farmland, all of these things seem to be rooted in this pursuit of more consumption,
mm,
which entails a destruction of the natural or the over extraction of natural resources of our planet in a very unsustainable way. And all of this is sort of contributing to a real change in our ecology and the destruction of species, plant life and
mm,
all of these things. And that's just one part of it. And then I discovered, the social cost
mm,
of this overconsumption and this pursuit of more.
mhm,
And so these sort of themes just started to become apparent. And as I then moved to the Jason Hickel book, I started to see the data that he was presenting and how we've evolved and moved to a capitalist system, which seems to be the untouchable kind of way of life that we can't seem to question that it could be any other way.
This pursuit of growth is
Growth for growth's sake.
Only option. And also part of the story of modern industrial capitalism is not only is it the only option, but growth is good because it gives everybody what it needs and it benefits society. And there's a lot behind that story.
And so now, whereas this guy's book was more of a social experiment on how he went about doing things in a moneyless world, which is a very extreme, not very practical for everyone to sort of go to that level. But I think he was trying to prove a point. But the Degrowth book started to challenge this idea that what economists have been saying all along, that growth is the holy grail and that is the answer to all our problems. And the thing that started to speak to me in our conversations is, well, the current system doesn't work for everyone.
Never has.
And it never has. And maybe there isn't a system that will work for everyone, because I just don't know. But definitely what we have at the moment is not that great. You know, when we just look at the evidence that surrounds, but yet we tell ourselves a lie, especially maybe in more developed countries, the global north, the colonial powers, that comes into it. And what trajectory we're on actually doesn't seem to be all that great when we look at the numbers. And so,
and I just want to again pause you a moment. We'll come back to many of these points in coming episodes. So just to remind listeners, we know today is going to be a bit free fall and almost following your energy, and then we might dive into topics. I think there's a number of important things you say, but there's two particular steps. The first is the trajectory. If we carry on like this, there are many indications that the trajectory is negative. So we've been told growth, consume more because that drives growth. The more growth there is, that's better for everyone. And one insight is, well, hang on, the current trajectory is terrible in terms of all sorts of environmental, ecological, and social indicators, but particularly ecological. So it might not be that good for us. The other recognition, which is part of it, but I think it's worth separating, is, and by the way, there's a large number of the world who this isn't all that good for anyway, and never has been. So it's not good for those of us in the privileged, materially developed, industrialized West, because pretty quickly the game's going to stop and maybe our children are going to really struggle. And by the way, let's also recognize that our, what we might say, sort of late stage capitalism, consumerist indulgence has been on the backs maybe of a lot of people for whom it also hasn't been very good.
And this really struck me quite hard, because there was a clear evidence to suggest that the global north, industrialized powers, the economies that are so-called developed, have achieved a lot of this on the back of some pretty nasty, exploitative policies and, let's call it, sort of pillaging of the less developed.
So what historical period are you talking about? Things like slavery or
just
extraction I think of resources?
I think colonization, slavery, the fact that you've got resource-rich continent like Africa, which has never been really allowed to use their natural resources for the benefit of their own people, but it's often been in the service of colonial masters. That's just one example. That was really hard to sort of read and to think, well, yeah, and the whole idea of, privilege that we've talked about previously, and unfairness and those conversations that we've had really start to hit home, because, I'm part of that system and benefiting from it. And you've got farmers in Kenya who are farming on, 5 pence a day kind of thing, so that we can have fruits and tea and all of those things nicely packaged and boxed up.
Fresh flowers.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so bizarre. And I think also it's the fact that the narrative that's spun, and especially in my world of sort of money and finance, is that we're sort of told that, well, anyone who speaks any differently just doesn't know what they're talking about.
Now, who are we taught that by? Because I don't disagree.
Well,
but
I think politicians who are effectively incentivized by big corporations as well.
Well, again, let's just divide. I don't disagree with what you say, but let's start to get a bit subtle. All politicians, some politicians, is it generational? Is it party political?
I think it's quite, well, I don't know enough at this stage. So but definitely the governing powers across all the global north, I think it's self-serving as well, so I'm not pointing fingers and being very judgmental about it, because
Feel free if that's
but it
where
just
you're at.
feels that it's almost like self-serving narrative that you need to believe in order to keep the hamster wheel running, so to speak.
Well, again, it seems to me there's at least two positions. One is we need to believe to keep the hamster wheel running, which we're all doing individually to some extent, and maybe society does. The other is, even though the current trajectory probably won't work well in the future and clearly doesn't work for everyone now, there's an argument that it still benefits a small number of people, right?
Yeah.
The people who are doing materially, financially extremely well in the current setup. Now, we've explored on this podcast that just because someone's doing financially or materially well, it doesn't mean they're successful or content or happy or even feel safe or anything in other areas of their life. We've explored that psychologically, kind of in some depth. But until people really do that deep work, anyone with lots of stuff and lots of money will be inclined to do whatever they can to preserve that, because they will tend to believe this keeps me powerful, keeps me safe, keeps me successful, even though we know that's not true. And so if you can, you will try to either influence the people who write the rules or rig the rules or write the rules. So partly we're all very busy on the hamster wheel, but also we shouldn't underestimate that the people who have power in media, policy making, money to influence, are far more likely to try and influence mass opinion and political opinion to keep things the same. And one way historically all people do that is make it appear like anyone who's offering a critique or a different view is just stupid or nuts or naive or doesn't understand.
Yeah.
And you see that happen all the time, which is why when someone who's clearly not stupid or naive like you, who's very thoughtful and maybe understands a lot about this, has been researching it, when someone like you kind of realize, my God, there are all of these kind of other ideas out there and these critiques, and they're not all just by crazy people. Some of them are by proper economists and really sensible people and thoughtful people. It can feel like a red pill moment.
Yeah.
Partly because the ideas are new, but it's almost like, well, why aren't these ideas being discussed? Why is the range of discussion about what really makes a happy, healthy society, or how we might think about money, why is it so narrow when actually there are all of these other ideas out there? It's just they get hidden, not talked about, or branded as crazy. And there's reasons why that happens.
I mean, it's such a valid point, because even if I look at my journey to date, I would have kind of scoffed at the kind of eco warrior maybe as little as a year ago. Oh, tree huggers. What do they know? Really sort of judging. I mean, come on, growth is the way forward. Make more money. That's going to help everyone be more enriched. That's the way to get people. And then
that's what we're told. By and large, that's still strongly the mainstream argument. We maybe come onto this in another episode, but what's frightening is when they've done studies about how little MPs, members of parliament who make our laws, actually understand economics or money creation. So they are actually more like, mainly, not all parties, by the way, but they will typically, it's not like they're super intelligent people who've really thought this through and they've come to a different opinion to Jason Hickel or you. It's that they're just people who've just absorbed a view about growth and what's good and more is better and everybody benefits from more billionaires. They've just absorbed that story and believe it and never question it. And they will also view people coming from a different position more as weirdos, loonies, radicals. That there's a reason why left of centre politics is often called the loony left.
Yeah.
There's a reason why, and by the way, I'm not saying they don't have problems or blind spots of their own. I'm not saying that. But there is a reason why politicians who, few and far between, do try to talk in this way get absolutely slated by the mainstream media in a way that politicians who might be equally or far more outrageous but still within mainstream economics get put up with all kind of, oh well, that's just them. It seems to me the people who genuinely threaten the story of continual growth is good and therefore by and large we should keep things as they are get a far more hostile, negative and kind of scathing and disrespectful treatment than people who, and I'm thinking of, you know, people like Johnson or Farage, or who may be outrageous in certain ways and very unfounded in some of their views, but because they're part of that world and also benefiting from it, they seem to get far more tolerated. So it's no surprise that someone like you, I don't know if you're a particular political person, when you encounter these ideas, you kind of go, my God, only a year ago, I would have thought these were tree-hugging loonies. Because that's how different views of economics are still portrayed by the mainstream. And isn't that interesting if we think about money and life and what's really important?
Yeah, and this conversation just opens up so many cans of worms for me as in my profession, because of how embedded I am in the modern capitalist system. And to even question it, I feel a bit like, well, you know, yeah, my peers might think I've gone a bit wacky, even just suggesting that. Well, I think we need to start questioning growth for growth's sake. You know, is GDP really the holy grail and the metric that we should be adhering to in order to ensure that humanity as a whole is moving in the right direction? I think I'll be,
or even gets to survive.
well,
Because
I
if we
mean,
continue to grow in the same way, again, there's a complexity. But the suggestion is, one of the phrases of that movement is, infinite growth on a finite planet is literally impossible. In other words, if you have an economy that's geared to continually expand, to extract, create, produce, and also waste, because things in the end, you know, become waste more and more exponentially, and you're doing that within a closed system that has real physical, ecological limits, then at some point you're going to rub up against those boundaries. That to me just seems kind of physical law, physical fact. But the fact that even talking about that would have you maybe worried that people think you've gone crazy. It's telling us something is incredibly distorted or confused about the financial economic conversation.
yeah. And I think the other thing that I wanted to sort of mention, aside from the feeling of alienating myself, let's just call it that, but actually, based on the work and the conversations that we've had over 50 plus episodes now, and you know, bits of other sort of coaching and workshops that I've attended, in a strange way, when I read this and it resonated with me, almost like touched a intuitive part of me that's always felt that things aren't just operating the way they should be. And that's quite strange, because I can't put any sort of data to that, but it's just been a feeling that things aren't quite right. And why should there be so many people on a planet which is abundantly rich in resources and money? And we've talked about how we can find money for certain things that, you know, and money will flow in a certain direction, but doesn't necessarily flow in another direction. And it's like, well, yeah, why is that? Because I don't think there's a shortage of money, because, you know, like you said, bomb manufacturers are having a whale of a time at the moment and military contractors and people that are going to have to rebuild the places that have been bombed to smithereens are going to have a fantastic few decades rebuilding the towns and cities.
That's right. And they're seeing, sorry, go on. Yeah.
And so just observing the world, and if I take off my bias hat of, well, I'm part of the system and I kind of have to keep the narrative running because that's what people want to hear. And if you start to challenge that, then you're going to scare people and alienate yourself. But on a very human level, this stuff has resonated with me, especially around when we've talked about retirement and like the value of elders in the community and all of this cooperative way of being and existing with society and with the environment. There's something about that just feels like, that's a bit more of a centered place. And because I know that more money, the qualities that we're looking for aren't being found in the money. And so maybe that's kind of triggered this more in touch with another way of doing things, because I'm not now as heavily bought into this idea that the bigger the number, growth, GDP, whatever it is, stock market returns, etc., numbers, profit for corporations, in those numbers, we're not actually finding what we really need. And maybe that's led to this softening approach I've started to develop. So yeah, there's lots there. And as we said, this is an introductory conversation. I'm interested in actually exploring this and for you to bring a little bit of structure and direction as to what are the main themes, topics, areas of conversation, because I feel like I need to go back and pull out my book and see all the bits that I've highlighted, because there were huge numbers of pages that I just felt like I was looking on my Kindle. I was like meant to highlight a paragraph, but I ended up like highlighting like 3 pages because there was just so much great stuff. And yeah, where do we go?
So what I like about this conversation is I've had the privilege in my life of hanging out with a lot of people who have thought about this very deeply and maybe been more activist and kind of critical questioning of the status quo. And that's great. And I'm glad they're there and they're doing important work. And it's good to know that there have been some really, really brilliant minds trying to think about this stuff for ages, right? It would be terrifying if we were the first people to think about this. And one of the problems those people have is they often feel like, it's so obvious. Why don't people listen? And then they get into understanding power. Because a lot of what you're talking about, for example, the fear of alienation in my community or my professional community, if I speak out, that's actually a power dynamic. A lot of us spend time not asking questions or not questioning stuff or not saying what we really think or not. It's a bit like Emperor's New Clothes, not pointing out, I don't think this is all that great that we've got more billionaires, multi-billionaires. We don't because of the risks, and that's about power. Likewise, so is if a heterodox economist who's taking, if you like, an alternative or non-mainstream position, they often, their careers get ruined less, but still they get laughed at. So I think we need to talk about power, but a lot of people I talk to, they're in that world and they're kind of working with this stuff. Then still, I would say the vast majority of people aren't thinking about it at all. And what I like about this conversation is you're someone who's really almost like a live case study of moving from the mainstream to a more questioning, critical position. So I think what we can do is pay attention to all the things you say and experience, and that maybe becomes our conversation. So one thing you have talked about is this story of growth. I think we'll do an episode on that. Story of growth. What is the mainstream story? Why is it suspect? And that's looking out there, but then about really what our podcast is about, our individual choices, our individual money life behaviors. So we can make a link between this old and new story around growth, and again, what it might mean for me and my life and my money. I think we maybe do that. We maybe do one on power. There might be a few others that unfold from that. You've talked about kind of pensions and elderhood, and there may be something about, with this new awareness, what is it to live well for myself, but also future generations. And I guess what I love, I don't know if this is a whole episode, but when you said it's like I've always had a feeling it didn't make sense, a feeling. And I think that's true for many, many, many people, right? Because it's true. And for me, this is an example of what we talk about always on this podcast: money story, life story, money path, life path. So one way I kind of hear what you said, Shabba, is, well, a financial advisor, I kind of took on my society's story and maybe my culture's story and maybe a family story, like we all do. And that is, for most of us, until we take the red pill or meet someone who questions it or whatever, that is the money path story, right? What the vast majority of us absorb first is the money path story, which is some version of, we've talked about it on the podcast, sort out money and then you get to live life and do what you want. Now, on the podcast, we've talked about that as a personal story. I got to stay in the job I don't want to get the money to do what I really love, or I got to find ways to get money. I can't trust myself to really follow or create this thing. That's a personal thing. But that story is also operating collectively. It's a shared story. That's why it's so compelling and feels so hard to get out of. And that story is when the Labour government in the UK, which is now in terrible trouble in some regard, got elected, their whole story wasn't really about optimism or changing society or fairness, or they could have chosen any number of stories that were uplifting, that spoke to people's hearts, to life, to what's really important. But what was their thing? Growth. We're about growth. And it didn't feel believable at the time. It didn't move anyone. It didn't touch people. We can get into politics. The money path story is both very compelling. It's like the emperor's new clothes because everyone believes it and we feel we should. And yet, really, it's never actually very mobilizing or energizing because it's not, because it can't be, because it's about numbers, because it's about a promise based on numbers, that if we get the numbers right, then we get what we want in life or in society. So just like in our own lives, we often deny ourselves what brings us vitality or life or feels kind of this deep impulse because of numbers, or we think we need to get the numbers right. That's what's going on in society. And there might be very clever people who call themselves economists or financiers or whatever, who will tell you it has to be like that, but maybe it doesn't, right? Because we always say on this podcast, we're not being stupid about money. We're just always choosing life first. So when you say, I've gone on a bit of a rant there, but when you say, I had a feeling it wasn't right, but I kind of acted and believed and thought it should be. The feeling is that part of you, and I would say it's in all of us, wherever we are in the political spectrum, wherever we are with our money, the part that says it isn't right to organize a society on increasing a number. Because although I'm hypnotized and people tell me and all the economists will laugh at me, that doesn't feel what life's about. And if it's not what life's about, we shouldn't organize a society that way. It doesn't make sense. The bit that feels that, I would say, is the bit of you that's kind of always in touch with the life path. So this kind of dance, relationship, dynamic battle between the life and money is going on at every level. And then, and this comes back to power. We might do a couple of episodes on power. We live in a society, by and large, where someone who says, you know what, I'm going to follow life, or I'm going to make a policy based on what's really uplifting for people, doesn't get considered a serious person. They get laughed at as a hippie or an idealist, or, right? And the person who says, no, 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 we have to do this, gets treated as a serious person, even if they're a laughing stock in terms of their actual understanding. That is why you get people like Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, people who've been Chancellor of the Exchequer, who make insane decisions. And all right, they are now laughed at, but they can make speeches about this, about absolutely crazy stuff, but they get treated as serious people. And people who say, well, hang on, why is it we can find billions for wars, but we still have homeless people? Or in America right now, they're arguing They're suggesting that the current Iranian war action might cost overall $1 trillion, but they're also pulling back on healthcare. Now, you could say, well, that's just a political debate about where we allocate money. But even that is to kind of dumb it down into a money-centered conversation. I'm saying, no, it's not about that. It's about life. Do we want to kill people, or is it better to make people well? And if you're saying that's just a policy discussion about budget, I would say you've already missed the point. There is a deeper intelligence about what actually gives people life. So I'm kind of ranting, and maybe that's because I'm in touch with my life energy right now, right? Because I think your exploration is touching something incredibly important. Doesn't mean I have the answers, but I think opening up the space to say, hey, this money life stuff, it's not just about me and whether I get to play more golf, or whether I do work I love, or whether maybe I could leave this job I don't love a few years early and worry less. It's not just about that. Yes, that's important. But is there a whole conversation we could all be having in society that's still not really about whether you're Labour or Tory or this or that, about what happens if we put life at the centre? And I think the passion you're hearing in me is I would sort of defend the legitimacy and the intelligence and the rigor to say, let's put life at the center, even if I'm not a leading economist. And this is part of the power dynamic we'll come back to. So I'll stop ranting. Where's that taken you? We've probably got a few minutes left today.
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like this is such a vast, I was going to say a problem, but it's, it's just a topic which is at the center of everything we do and how we arrange our life. That actually it's the most important thing in terms of our existence on this planet. And whatever your belief, whether you're a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Christian, a Jewish, Hindu, atheist, rich, poor, it doesn't really matter. It's because we're all living. Yes. And we're all human beings, and that's what we have in common. And it's almost like, well, why haven't we arranged the way that we live?
A good question.
Why haven't we arranged the way that we live that's conducive for everyone? And I'm sort of leaning towards this, that I think a lot of this is just linked to human fear, and greed, and insecurity, because we've just got this idea that in the bigger number, I'm going to be okay. And then that obviously translates into, well, if I need a bigger number, like you said, we've got to arrange policy and economics and stuff, which is going to ensure that I get the bigger number. And it's almost like started from the individual. It's gone out into the greater arena. And then it's almost like dictated to back down to the individual.
That's right.
I almost feel like that's the way it's been shaped. What I'm interested in is, well, how did we arrange things previously? And, we could go back to thousands of years ago in the tribe, and we didn't have industrialization and all of those sort of things. And how were societies arranged, and what was the philosophy at the time of how do you live? How do you arrange your consumption and the patterns involved in all of that? And obviously there's many more people on the planet, and we've got different constraints and different parameters through which we sort of operate now as more of a globalized community as opposed to a little localized. But these things just fascinate me, because ultimately the human experience is still the human experience. And it almost feels like, is everyone just sleeping?
Well, back to the Matrix. So we need to finish off. Let me say a couple of things. The first thing, dear listener, you see we're both getting excited. We're going to do a series on this, probably 3 or 4 podcasts, like we did on the series about work, or we did a series on what to charge. We'll probably do 3 or 4. We won't stay down this rabbit hole. I don't think we're going to suddenly become a political podcast. But as we go down the rabbit hole and explore these topics, we'll keep linking back to our own individual money life questions. But I love what you say, Shabbar, because what you articulated very well is our individual consciousness, including our blind spots, our shadows, which we've explored a lot on the podcast, right? I feel insecure, so I think money will make me feel secure, but I'm not conscious of it. well, then of course I'm going to create a system that tries to get me more money and holds on to my money and might deprive people of others. So big systems, the rules of the game, education, which economics gets praised, all of this stuff are shaped by our individual blind spots, our lack of awareness or wholeness. But then as we create those institutions, they then maintain or repeat that. So we start to think that's reality, right? So if all the policies reflecting a certain view that's based on my distortion, then everyone will start to believe that the distortion is just real or just how the world is. Or if all the economics, again, kind of perpetuates my basic insecurity or greed or need for something that I think protects me, that's what gets funded. But then that's what I'll learn. I think that's real. So my individual consciousness is creating the collective consciousness, but then is also shaped by the collective consciousness. That then makes it very interesting, because when we then do our inner work, which we talk about on this podcast, and we're not a political podcast, we might think, well, that's one way of changing the wider system. So we'll talk about that as well. I think your question is a beautiful way maybe to leave it for now. There's a world with, a lot of people, but a lot of very, very clever human ingenuity, a lot of resources. We are using them far too quickly and we are depleting the planet, but there's still a lot there. And huge amounts of money sort of somewhere being allocated to something. And your question, why haven't we arranged the way we live to make it work for everyone? And how might we do that? What has this story about the money path and the life path and the work we do about my wholeness comes from seeing which bits of me I get lost or entangled in the pursuit of money? That some of that might help us answer the question of, well, why have we created this system and how might we get out of it? So I look forward to diving in and maybe coming up with some ideas and some things that are helpful in the next few episodes.
I look forward to it, Tim. I think I'm going to go and lie down. I'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.